Previously, we learned up to clause 7, part 1 first schedule. Now we are moving for clause 8, which is very popular. In fact, this clause is asking a chartered accountant in practice as and when he is accepting any audit assignment to make communication with the previous auditor. Means the person whoever has done the same job previously. In fact, people know it as NOC, but in fact it is not being known, it should not be treated as NOC. The reason behind, even if the previous auditor denies, still we can accept this audit assignment. Then why we are making communication with previous auditor? Because it's a requirement of clause 8, part 1 for schedule. We are making communication with two reasons. Reason number 1, we are extending professional courtesy. He is being my professional brother. And that's why before I accept his assignment, which was previously being handled by him, it's better I should communicate with him. So I'm extending professional courtesy in this way. And second, I'm asking him, is there any reason why I should not accept the assignment of this year, this particular assignment, this particular client? With these two reasons I'm making communication. Number 1, I'm extending professional courtesy. And number 2, I'm asking him, is there any reason why I should not accept the assignment of this year? In fact, communication should be made before you accept the audit. So you need to make a communication before you accept the audit, and you should wait for reasonable time period for reply. But there is one exception. In case of government department, many a time they are in hurry to submit their audit report to different authorities, and they are giving us comparatively lesser time. And that's why on exceptional basis, I can say that we can start our work of audit with the provisional communication. So on a single side we will make the communication, and on the other side we will start with the work of audit. And in that case, at least before we sign the audit report, our communication should be made over. So normally communication should be made over before you accept the audit, but the exception being that is government department, where they are in hurry to submit their audit report, they are giving us comparatively lesser time, and that's why we are starting our work of audit with the provisional communication, and at least before we sign the auditor's report, our communication should be made over. Here, in this case, with whom you need to make a communication? You need to make communication whoever has done the same job previously. Suppose you are being appointed as an internal auditor, you are supposed to communicate with previous internal auditor. But suppose there is no previous internal audit position, in that case you are not supposed to communicate with a statutory auditor. So you need to make a communication only with those whoever has done the same job previously. At the same time, this is required in every audit. And one misconception is there. Previous auditor doesn't mean previous year's auditor. In fact, in a last year there was no tax audit, but last year there was a tax audit. But in this year there is again a tax audit. So I'm supposed to communicate. In fact, in a previous year there was no tax auditor. So I need to communicate with the tax auditor whoever has done previously. Previous auditor doesn't mean previous year's auditor. Moreover, we need to keep in mind that certificate of posting is not enough. Certificate of posting means ordinary post. Your communication must be made through registered post. We are not simply doing a formality on a single side, we are just writing a letter. In fact, we are really having intention to communicate with the previous auditor, and that's why ordinary post is not enough. You need to make communication only through registered post, and you need to wait for reasonable time period for reply. Within a reasonable time period, if you are not getting reply, you can start with the work of the audit. Now there are three situations where we are bound not to accept the audit assignment. If the result of communication, like any of these three, we are bound not to accept the audit, this particular audit. Number 1, if his undisputed audit fees not being paid. Suppose I made a communication with him and he's saying that my fees are outstanding and I have a doubt, will I get this amount of fees or not? In that case, I am bound not to accept the audit assignment. It should be undisputed audit fees. What does it mean? It should be written on the debit side of P&L account and balance sheet liability side, which is being signed by both auditor as well as the client. And if he is saying that I have a doubt, many a time it is possible that on a balance sheet date the fees are outstanding. Just having outstanding fees is not the reason why I will not accept the assignment, but he should demonstrate that I have objection that if you are accepting this particular audit, in that case I am bound not to accept the audit assignment. Suppose I accept this audit assignment even if the previous auditor's fees were outstanding, and he demonstrated that you don't accept this audit. Still, if I accept the audit, will I make violation of clause 8? No. Because clause 8 is simply saying you should make a communication, and that's what I have made, and that's why I'm not making a violation of clause 8, but I'm making a violation of some other clause which we will discuss later. But first point here, it is being said that if the previous year's undisputed audit fees not being paid to the previous auditor, you are bound not to accept the assignment of this particular year. Number one. Number two, if the formalities under section 139, 140 is not being complied with. These sections are of Companies Act. This would become applicable only in case of company audit. And if section 139, 140, which is related with the removal of the previous auditor, appointment of new auditor, if these sections are not complied with, you are bound not to accept the assignment. But still, if you are accepting, are you making violation of clause 8? Not at all, because clause 8 is simply saying you should make a communication, and that's what you have already made, and that's why you are not making a violation of clause 8, but rather you are making a violation of clause 9, which we will discuss later, the next clause. And the third situation, if the previous auditor is proving that I am being removed out of my office only because of the fact that I give a qualified or adverse report, then I am bound not to accept the audit assignment of this year. If the previous auditor is proving anyhow that I am being removed out of my office only because of the fact that he gave qualified or adverse report, this is the reason why we should not accept the audit assignment. So if I summarize this particular clause, this clause is saying that we should make communication with previous auditor in writing. It should not be an oral communication. Communication should be made over before you accept the audit and not before you sign the auditor's report. But there is one exception, that is government department. When the exceptional basis, we can start our work of audit with the provisional communication, and at least before we sign the auditor's report, our communication should be over. At the same time, with whom I need to make a communication? The person whoever has done the same job previously. If in a previous year there is no such position, I am not supposed to communicate with any other person. Previous auditor doesn't mean previous year's auditor. At the same time, you need to remember that ordinary post is not enough. It should be only through registered post. And in three situations, we are bound not to accept the assignment. Number one, if he is proving that he was being removed out of office only because of the fact that he gave a qualified report. If there is a violation of section 139 and 140. And third one, if the undisputed audit fees of previous auditor not being paid. Now, if we see the practicals related with this particular clause, we will have a better understanding. Practical number one, which is saying that Mr. X, a chartered accountant, accepted his appointment as a tax auditor of a firm under section 44AB of Income Tax Act and commenced the tax audit within 2 days of his appointment. Since client was in hurry to file the return of income before the due date. After commencing the audit, Mr. X realized his mistake of accepting this tax audit without sending any communication to the previous tax auditor. In order to rectify his mistake before signing the tax audit report, he sent a registered post to the previous auditor and obtain the postal acknowledgement. Will Mr. X be held guilty under the CA Act? For this particular question, if you remember clause 8 is saying that you need to make communication with previous auditor before you accept the audit and not before you sign the auditor's report. One exception is there, and that is only in case of government department and not otherwise. This is a case of a tax audit, and in a case of tax audit, you need to make communication with the previous auditor before you accept the audit and not before you sign the auditor's report. And that's why in a current case, we can say it's a clear violation of clause 8, part 1, first schedule of Chartered Accountant Act 1949. Again, I want to convey that clauses we are always writing numerics. Part 1, part 2 we are writing in Roman number, and first schedule, second schedule we will always write in words. Moreover, you need to remember your answer would be in two parts. First part would be clause itself, and in the second part you need to correlate that particular clause with the question. If we move to the second question is asking P&N Company, a firm of practicing CAs, was appointed as the internal auditor of a company. They failed to intimate their appointment to the statutory auditor. Is there any breach of code of conduct in the above case? Now, basically, we learn that we need to make a communication with whom? We need to make a communication whoever has done the same job previously. In fact, if I am being appointed as an internal auditor, I am supposed to communicate only with internal auditor and not with the statutory auditor. Now, in a current case, there is no previous internal audit position. And if there is no previous internal audit position, I am not supposed to communicate with the statutory auditor. So, no communication is required, and if no communication is being made, still there is no violation of clause 8, part 1, first schedule of Chartered Accountant Act 1949. If we move to the third question, Mr. Rajesh has accepted his appointment as an auditor immediately after intimating his appointment over the phone to the previous auditor. Now we know that this communication under clause 8 is always being made. That is a written communication. Oral telephonic communication will not be enough, and that's why communication must be made in a written way. Here the communication is just made in a telephonic way, and that's why in a current case there is a clear misconduct of clause 8, part 1, first schedule of Chartered Accountant Act 1949. If we move to the next question, that is W, a chartered accountant, has sent letter under certificate of posting to the previous auditor, informing him his appointment as an auditor before the commencement of audit by him. Now we have recently learned under clause 8 that whenever we make the communication with previous auditor, it should be by way of registered post and it should not be by way of ordinary post. Registered post is giving us assurance that my communication reached to the previous auditor, which assurance we are not getting in case of the ordinary post, and that's why in a current case, ordinary posting, certificate of posting means ordinary post, where we are not getting the assurance whether the letter reached to the previous auditor or not, and that's why in a current case it would be treated as a clear violation of clause 8 part 1 first schedule of Chartered Accountant Act 1949. Ordinary post is not enough. You are not simply doing formality. You are intentionally making communication with a previous auditor with two reasons. Number one, you are extending the professional courtesy, and number two, you are asking him, is there any reason why you should not accept the assignment of this particular year? The next question, Ashok was appointed by the central government as an internal auditor. He accepted appointment and proceeded with the work without communicating with the statutory auditor of the company. Again, the question is similar. You are being appointed as the internal auditor and you are not supposed to make communication with the statutory auditor. You need to make communication with the person whoever has done the same job previously. And if there is no such previous position, you are not supposed to make communication with anyone else. But you need to keep in mind that previous auditor doesn't mean previous year's auditor. In fact, in earlier year, if there is an internal auditor, you need to make communication with him, but that is not being clarified in the question itself, and that's why in a current case we can say he has not made any violation under clause 8 part 1 first schedule of Chartered Accountant Act 1949. If we are moving to the next question, comment on the following with reference to the Chartered Accountant Act 1949 and schedules thereto. PQ and Company, a firm of chartered accountant, accepted the assignment for audit under state level VAT Act without any prior communication with the previous auditor. In fact, we can also say now VAT is being replaced by GST if the same question is related with GST, or if we continue with the concept of VAT only. This is not under any state act or any central act. The communication should be made with a previous auditor. In fact, it is being applicable to a chartered accountant in practice. Whatever position he is accepting, whether it's a statutory audit, whether it is an internal audit, whether it is a tax audit, whether it is a VAT audit, GST audit, any audit, it is not applicable whether it's related with a state law or whether it is related with central law. It is just applicable to a CA in practice, that as and when he is accepting any position which was being previously handled by any other CA in practice, then he should make communication in writing, and that's why in a current case, be it be a VAT audit or be it be a GST audit, he should make communication with previous auditor in writing, and if he is not meeting, in that case it would be treated as a violation of clause 8 part 1 first schedule of Chartered Accountant Act 1949. The next question, G and Company, a firm of chartered accountant, was appointed as the internal auditor of UN Limited, replacing H and Company, another firm of chartered accountant, which had expressed their inability to continue as the internal auditor to the management through a resignation letter. G and Company proceeded to conduct the internal audit without communicating with H and Company. A good question. I want to say that you need to make a communication with a previous auditor irrespective of fact whether the previous auditor resigned or management changed the previous auditor. It's not like that only if the management is changing the previous auditor you need to make communication with the previous auditor. Even if the previous auditor is resigning and you are accepting that particular position, you should make a communication with previous auditor, which is missing in this particular case, and that's why it will be treated as violation of clause 8 part 1 first schedule of Chartered Accountant Act 1949. Moving to the next clause, that is clause 9. Clause 9 is basically applicable only in respect of company audit. This would become applicable only in case of company audit position and not otherwise. As and when you accept the company audit position, you need to make sure the formalities under section 139, 140, 141 and 142 is complied with or not. These sections are related with what? Section 139 is related who will do the appointment. Like section 139 bracket 7 is saying that in case of government company, the first auditor would be appointed by CAG. 139(5) is saying in case of subsequent auditor, in case of government company, would be appointed by CAG within 180 days from the beginning of the financial year. 140 is related with the removal of the previous auditor. 141 is related with the qualification and disqualification of auditor, and 142 is related with the remuneration. Violation of any section, and still if you are accepting the assignment, in that case you will be subject to clause 9 part 1 first schedule of Chartered Accountant Act 1949. This would become applicable, make very clear, only in case of company audit assignment and not otherwise. So if it is a question of tax audit or any other type of audit, this section won't become applicable, and that's why this clause won't become applicable. Moreover, recently in clause 8, at the ending of clause 8, we learn that if it is being already made sure that section 139 and 140 is not being complied with, still if you are accepting the assignment, will it be treated as violation of clause 8? Not at all. It won't be treated as violation of clause 8, rather it will be treated as violation of clause 9, because clause 8 is saying what? Clause 8 is simply saying that you should make communication with the previous auditor, and which you already made. So there is no violation of clause 8, rather it would be treated as violation of clause 9. There would be question under this particular clause 9, which will be a combination of clause 8 and clause 9 also. So the basic understanding of this particular clause, as and when you accept the company audit assignment, you need to make sure whether the requirement of section 139, 140, 141 and 142 is complied with or not. For that purpose, any certificate given by the management is not enough. If management is giving you in writing a written representation that we have complied with all this section is not enough on your part, you need to observe it particularly from the minute book of AGM and from the other law formalities, whether your appointment is being made in a valid way or not. Without observing this, if you are accepting the assignment or just blindly relying upon the certificate or representation given by the management, if you are blindly relying upon the same, you will be subject to clause 9 part 1 first schedule of Chartered Accountant Act 1949. If we see the questions related with the same, the first question is saying P, a chartered accountant, has accepted appointment as an auditor of QRS Company Limited without ascertaining from the company whether the requirement of section 139 and 140 of the Companies Act 2013 had been complied with. However, he realized this defect only after acceptance. In this particular case, there is a violation of clause 9, because he should make sure as and when the acceptance is being done that the formalities of section 139 and 140 is complied with. He should see from the minute book that his appointment is being validly made. Section 139 is saying who will do the appointment. If it's being a normal non-government company, in that particular case appointment should be done by the shareholders in AGM. So shareholders have validly made the appointment. Whether the notice was sent to the shareholders for AGM for 21 clear days, for that purpose whether the board meeting held or not, this all formalities need to be observed by the auditor, incoming auditor, and without observing the same, if he is accepting the appointment, in that case it would be treated as violation of clause 9 part 1 first schedule of Chartered Accountant Act 1949. So it's a clear violation in a current case. If we move to the second question, XN Company Chartered Accountant were informed by True & Company Limited that they have been appointed as auditor of the company in place of ABC and Company, who have been removed subject however to the approval of the shareholders in the ensuing, means forthcoming annual general meeting. XN Company accepted the appointment and commenced the work without their appointment being approved by the shareholders of the company. This question is making violation of two particular clauses, clause 8 and clause 9 both. This is quite natural. Suppose the year of 1516 is over. The AGM of 1516 would be made in 1617. The AGM of the year 1516 would be made in 1617. Suppose the AGM is kept on 16th September. Now the year has already started. Before a new auditor is being appointed, informally it would be communicated that you are likely to be appointed as an auditor. Now in that particular case, he is thinking the year has already started, the month of April, May, June, July, August is over, accounts are ready, better we should start with the work of audit. But in that particular case, he is making violation of two different clauses. Number one, clause 8, which is saying he should make communication with the previous auditor. In fact, in a current case, the previous auditor's communication is not being made. And number 2, that the violation of clause 9, which is saying that the formalities of section 139 and 140 need to be complied with. In a current case, still the AGM is not being held, still a previous auditor is not being removed, still you are not being appointed. How can you start with the work of audit? And if you are starting with the work of audit, you are making violation of clause 8, clause 9, part 1 of first schedule of Chartered Accountant Act 1949. So in a current case, it would be treated as a clear violation of clause 8 and clause 9 of Chartered Accountant Act 1949 of first schedule. If we move to the next clause, that is clause 10. Clause 10 is talking about that as and when you accept any audit assignment, your fees cannot be contingent upon future finding. Means in a particular case, if I am winning your case in income tax appeal, I will charge 10,000. If I am losing the case, it would be 1,000 rupees. It should not be charged in this way. My fees would be 1% of your turnover. My fees would be 2% of your profit. We cannot charge fees which are contingent upon the future finding. Otherwise, our object will not remain true and fair view. Rather, our object would be to increase anyhow the amount of profit or amount of turnover, because our fees are correlated with the amount of profit and with the amount of turnover. And that's why we are being debarred from charging our fees which are contingent upon future finding. But there are certain exceptions to this rule. And exceptions are there under Regulation 192. You remember, always exceptions are given within regulations. Previously we learned Regulation 53A under clause 2, where we were being permitted to share our fees with the other professionals. We also learned 53B under clause 4, where we were being permitted to make partnership with the other professionals. And now this is the third one, Regulation 192, which is allowing us to charge our fees on contingent basis in certain exceptional cases. What are these exceptional cases where we can charge our fees contingent upon future finding? There are 3 demo example based exceptional cases, and there is a big list of it. It is being available in the material, but on the demo example basis, if I am saying, there are 3. If I am being accepting audit of a cooperative society, I can charge my fees contingent upon future finding. Number 2, if I am being appointed as a liquidator, I can charge my fees contingent upon future finding. And third one, if I am being appointed for valuation of goodwill for direct tax purpose, I can charge my fees contingent upon future finding. These are 3 exceptional cases where I can charge my fees contingent upon the future finding. Number 1, in case of a cooperative society. Number 2, liquidator of a company. And number 3, valuer of goodwill for direct tax purpose. There are other cases also, which is also being available in the material. But majority of the questions are coming out of these 3 exceptions. So basic fundamental understanding, clause 10 is saying you cannot charge your fees contingent upon future finding, but Regulation 192 is giving us this exception, and in this exceptional cases, if we are charging the fees contingent upon future finding, still it won't be treated as any violation. Now if we see the practicals related with the same, practical number 1, Mr. Jaydev has charged a fee for representing his client in an income tax appeal based on the expected relief to his client as a result of the appeal. Is he guilty of professional misconduct? I would say yes, he is clearly held responsible under clause 10. He is saying that I am representing your case in the appeal matter. If I am winning this particular case, I will charge 10,000 rupees. If I am losing this particular case, in that case for my administrative expense, I will just charge 1,000. You can't charge fees in this way. And if you are charging fees in this way, it would be treated as violation of clause 10, part 1, first schedule. So in a current case, it's a clear violation of clause 10, Part 1, first schedule of Chartered Accountant Act 1949. The second question, if we see, the chairman of audit committee of a blue chip company, who is a chartered accountant, asked the firm in which he was previously a partner to quote their fees on a success fee basis so as to ensure that a professional work is assigned to such firm. In this particular case, I want to say, whether it's a blue chip company or not doesn't make any difference. The chairman of the company is suggesting that audit firm that you charge fees contingent upon future finding on a success fee basis so that you can get this particular assignment. Why the chairman is advising in this particular way? Because he was being previously a partner of that particular firm. In this case, chairman is not subject to any clause, but that firm, if charging fees in this way, the firm would be subject to clause 10, part 1, first schedule of Chartered Accountant Act 1949. Again, I want to repeat that chairman is not subject to any clause, but that firm if charging fees in this way, in that case they are subject to clause 10, part 1, first schedule of Chartered Accountant Act 1949. Moving to the next question. A chartered accountant acting as a liquidator of a company charge fees as a percentage of realization of asset. As I recently said, there are certain exceptional circumstances where you can charge fees in this way. There are 3 exceptional circumstances. Number 1, auditor of a cooperative society. Number 2, liquidator of a company. And number 3, valuer of goodwill for direct tax purpose. In these 3 cases only, we can say regulation 192 is allowing us to charge our fees contingent upon future finding, and even if we charge, still it won't be treated as violation of clause 10, part 1, first schedule of Chartered Accountant Act 1949. Moving to the next question. Ms. Mungi, a practicing chartered accountant, accept her appointment as a valuer of goodwill of a business for the purpose of determining the value of gift under the Gift Tax Act on the condition she would be paid 5% on the value of goodwill so determined as her fees. Now basically in this case, valuation of goodwill for direct tax purpose is falling in exception. Nowadays we don't have a gift tax, but earlier there was a gift tax, and as and when there was a gift tax, it was a direct tax. So we can say it is falling within exception under regulation 192. Gift tax is abolished. Now there is no gift tax, but earlier there was a gift tax and it was a direct tax. So we can say it is falling within the exception valuation of goodwill for direct tax purpose. Regulation 192 is allowing us to charge our fees in this way, and that's why it won't be treated as violation of clause 10, part 1, first schedule of Chartered Accountant Act 1949. Moving to the next question. ASA Chartered Accountant in practice undertake to conduct an appeal before the Income Tax Appellate Tribunal. Terms 5,000 if she wins the appeal and 500 if she does not succeed. In this particular case, it's a clear violation of clause 10, part 1, first schedule. You can't charge fees in this way. If I'm winning your case in appeal 5,000, if I'm losing the case 500, you are charging your fees contingent upon future finding, and that's why it would be treated as violation of clause 10, part 1, first schedule of Chartered Accountant Act 1949. Moving to the next question. Mr. Bountiful, a practicing chartered accountant who is being appointed to value the goodwill of a running concern for the purpose of its takeover. Again I repeat, takeover. Charge his fees on the basis of a predetermined percentage of the value of the goodwill. You need to keep in mind within the exception under regulation 192, it is written valuation of goodwill for direct tax purpose and not the takeover purpose. It should be for direct tax purpose and not the takeover purpose, and that's why this particular question is not falling within the exception under regulation 192, and that's why in a current case it would be treated clearly as violation of clause 10, part 1, first schedule of Chartered Accountant Act 1949. Regulation 192 is giving us 3 exceptions: auditor of cooperative society, liquidator of company, and valuer of goodwill for direct tax purpose and not for the purpose of takeover. So in that case, it is not falling in exception, and that's why it would be treated as violation of clause 10. Moving to the next question. CADD, a chartered accountant, prepared a project report for one of his client to obtain bank finance, long term, rupees 50 lakhs from a commercial bank. Consequent to the sanction of the loan by the bank, CADD raised a bill for his service at the rate of 2% of the loan sanction. Now, this is what very natural that in a project finance work, the fees are being charged on a percentage of the loan sanction. But it is not falling in the exception. Exceptions are given under regulation 192, and that's why in a current case, the chartered accountant who charged 2% of the amount of the loan sanction would be held responsible under clause 10, part 1, first schedule. What is happening in a real life? In a real life, fees are also always being charged in this way. But in fact, as and when the invoice is being made, it is not being clearly mentioned 50% multiplied with 2% and this is the amount. In fact, the final amount would be indicated in the invoice which is being raised by the chartered accountant. And that's why it is always difficult to prove that his charge his fees contingent upon the future finding. But otherwise, practically we are knowing that in the work of project finance, fees are being charged only in this way. So if it is being proved only, then only he will be subject to clause 10, part 1, first schedule of Chartered Accountant Act 1949. Otherwise, we always know that fees are always being charged in this way, certain percentage of the loan sanction, but it is always difficult to prove because invoices are not being made in that particular way. But still, if it is being proved in any other way, it would be subject to Clause 10, Part 1, first schedule of Chartered Accountant Act 1949. Moving to the next question. Mr. PB, Chartered Accountant, prepared a project report for one of his clients, Mr. UB, to obtain long-term loan of rupees 100 lakhs from a scheduled bank and decided to charge fees at 10% of the loan approved. Subsequently, the bank approved the loan amounting to rupees 80 lakhs. Consequently, to the approval of loan by the bank, Mr. PB raised an invoice for his service at 10% of the loan approved as decided. In fact, within the list of exception under Regulation 192, fundraising services are falling within exception. It is written fundraising services are falling within exception, but if you see the questions which are given in PM, the same question is again given in PM, and where it would be treated as violation of Clause 10. It is contradicting. Here it is being mentioned that fundraising services are falling within exception of Regulation 192, but still in the questions in PM and module and RTP, in similar type of question, it is being clearly mentioned that it would be treated as violation of Clause 10, Part 1, first schedule, because you are charging fees contingent upon the future finding. Means you are making a project report, you are presenting a case in a bank, the bank is sanctioning the loan, and you are charging a certain percentage of it, and that's why it would be treated as violation of Clause 10, Part 1, first schedule of Chartered Accountant Act 1949. Moving to the next clause. The next clause is really important. That is Clause 11. If someone asks me the biggest restriction on the Chartered Accountant community, that is Clause 11. There are so many questions related with this particular clause. Clause 11 is applicable to CA in practice, where Clause 11 is saying a CA in practice cannot engage in any other business or profession. A big restriction. A CA in practice cannot engage in any other business or profession. Now, any other business or profession is being not allowed it to us? Yes. Means a CA in practice cannot have its own medical store in his own name. He cannot have any garment business. Moreover, profession, yes. If you are a CA in practice and you are also a company secretary, you cannot hold COP of both. You can hold COP either of CA or of CS, and credit goes to Clause 11. Clause 11 is saying, being CA in practice, don't engage yourself neither in any business nor in any practice. But nothing shall disentitle a chartered accountant from becoming a director. Even if he is also CA in practice, he can become a director of a company. I am saying director, not a managing director. Director of a company, provided he himself or his partner is not the auditor of the same concern. So Clause 11 is saying, don't engage in any other business or profession, but you can become a director provided yourself or your partner is not the auditor of the same concern. Now, apart from business or profession, we can think of many things to do. Can we do like delivering lectures, like writing a book? Many other things may be there in our mind. So we have a question. Can we do it or not? Does ICAI have answers to it? Yes. And for that purpose, ICAI drafted Regulation 190 capital A. Regulation 190 capital A is being bifurcated in two parts. Things what you can do freely and things what you can do subject to prior approval of the council. Certain things which you can do being CA in practice without asking ICAI, and certain things you can do only after taking prior approval of the council. So Regulation 190 capital A is bifurcated in two parts. One by one we will see each part. If we see the first list, that is of Regulation 190A, permission granted generally, where if a CA in practice is doing employment under any other chartered accountant or a firm of chartered accountant, he is not supposed to take prior approval of the council. But keep in mind, afterwards we will discuss the second list where permissions subject to prior approval apart from CA firm. If a CA in practice wish to do job somewhere in a company or in a trust or in any other firm, he will have to take a prior approval of the council. I want to repeat, if you are a CA in practice and you want to do a job under some chartered accountant or a firm of chartered accountant, you are not supposed to take a prior approval. But if you wish to go for a job under a company or a firm or a trust, in that case you will have to take a prior approval because it is not a CA firm. Second thing what we can do freely without taking prior approval, that's a private tutorship, doing tuitions, that is being freely allowed for a chartered accountant in practice. Third, authorship of book or article. Suppose you want to write a book, suppose you want to write an article, you can do it freely without asking ICAI. Holding life insurance agency license. I want to convey, before you became CA in practice, earlier you were LIC agent. LIC doesn't mean any insurance company agent. And you created a good clientele, a good business you generated. You had many clients. Being insurance agent, you are getting two different types of commission. Commission number one, that's being paid in the very first year as and when client is being selected, and afterwards it will be paid renewal commission every year as and when that particular client is paying LIC premium, you will get a commission. So you made a good clientele. You had many clients. Now, afterwards you became CA in practice. Now you cannot have a new client. But already clientele you developed in a past, if they are paying the renewal premium and out of which if you are getting renewal commission, CA Institute is not bothering about it and you are not supposed to take a prior approval. Moral of the story, holding life insurance agency license you can have without taking prior approval only in respect of renewal commission and not in respect of new commission. Means after becoming CA in practice, you cannot develop a new clientele. The next point is saying attending class and appearing for any exam. Suppose you are already a chartered accountant in practice and if you want to appear for any examination, if you want to attend classes somewhere, institute won't bother and you are not supposed to take prior approval. Plus, you can also become MP, MLA, municipal councillor without taking prior approval of the council. But yes, in a previous sessions only we learned that under clause 7, if you are MP, MLA, you cannot quote the same along with CA in practice because such degrees like MP and MLA is not being granted by any university or any approved institution. So freely, without taking prior approval of the council, you can become MP or MLA, but at the same time, you cannot mention the same along with CA. Honorary office of charitable educational institute, where you are becoming trustee somewhere, where you are just getting honorarium, where you are not getting any salary, you can become without taking any prior approval of any educational trust, social trust or the religious trust. Plus notary public, justice of peace, special executive magistrate, such kind of appointment if being made by any government. Suppose in case of government, there is some corruption case or there is some scandal and they appointed one committee and you are being appointed as a committee member and you are being granted with the powers of special executive magistrate. You are already a CA in practice. For taking this appointment, you are not supposed to take prior approval of the council. Moreover, part-time tutorship under the coaching organization of ICAI. Keep in mind, part-time tutorship under the coaching organization of ICAI and not otherwise. If you are delivering lectures in ICAI and in that particular case you are not supposed to take a prior approval of the council. But suppose if you are delivering lecture in any private institution, in any college on a full-time basis or a part-time basis, you are supposed to take a prior approval. But I want to clarify, if you are just going there as a visiting faculty, you are not on a payroll, you are just there as a visiting faculty, even in a college or in a private institution, you are not supposed to take a prior approval of the council. Moreover, valuation of paper setter, head examiner or moderator, any such kind of position if you want to accept, in that case you are not supposed to take prior approval of the council. If you want to become editor of the professional journal, you are not required to take a prior approval of the council. But if you want to become editor of any other journal other than professional journal, like sports journal, like political journal, in that case you will have to take a prior approval of the council. If you want to work as a surveyor, loss assessor under Insurance Act, you are not supposed to take a prior approval of the council. Recovery consultant in a banking sector as well as insurance brokerage. What does it mean, insurance brokerage? You need to keep in mind, as and when your client is approaching you, which insurance policy he should select. In that particular case, you are advising that particular client. For giving advice to the client, you can collect the amount from client, but you should not collect any amount from insurance company. You should not work for promotion of any product or policy of the insurance company. If you are taking amount from the insurance company, it would be treated as violation of regulation 190 capital A, because you are doing it without taking prior approval of the council. So insurance brokerage means, for giving advice to the client, you can collect the amount from the client and not from the insurance company. So these are the cases under regulation 190 capital A which we can do without taking prior approval of the council. Now if we see a list where we are supposed to take a prior approval of the council if we are already CA in practice. Number 1 and 2 is saying, apart from any job under CA in practice, if you are doing a job under any company, any firm or any trust, you should take a prior approval of the council. Number 2, for becoming a director somewhere, you are not supposed to take a prior approval. But for becoming a managing director is equal to manager plus director. So if you want to become a managing director or whole-time director, you are supposed to take a prior approval of the council. Plus, if you have any interest in the family concern, family business, in that case, you are supposed to take a prior approval. What happened? Father was having a big business. Father was only having one son, and that son was CA in practice. After the death of father, as per Hindu law, in inheritance, that business will transfer to the son. But son is also CA in practice. Son will have to do two things. Number 1, he will have to take a prior approval of the council, and number 2, he will have to prove that he doesn't have any active participation in this business. If he is enjoying the fruits of that business, in that case institute won't mind, but he will have to take a prior approval of the council, as well as he will have to prove that he doesn't have any active participation in the business. Moreover, if a CA in practice is engaging in any agriculture or allied activities, he will have to take a prior approval of the council. Plus, if a CA in practice is running any educational institute which is in a form of company, which is in a form of any partnership firm, in that case he will have to take a prior approval, because it will be as good as treated as a business. He is not a trustee over there. He is either over there as a proprietor or a partner or a director and enjoying the profits of that particular institute. In that case, he will have to take a prior approval of the council. Plus, if a CA in practice is delivering lectures somewhere on a part-time or full-time basis, anywhere other than ICAI, means in any private coaching institute or in any college, he will have to take a prior approval of the council, provided he is there on a payroll, either on a part-time or full-time basis. But if he is going there as a visiting faculty, in that case, he is not supposed to take prior approval of the council. Plus, editorship of any journal other than professional journal, then you need to take a prior approval of the council. And CA's mind are very creative. So apart from this list, he may have something additional in his mind, that this and that I can do or not. So they have made a last point under regulation 190 capital A for taking prior approval, that apart from the list given, any business or profession, if you wish to engage, then you will have to take a prior approval of the council. Now what happens if I go to take a prior approval of the council? Suppose I am going there for taking a prior approval of the council, it is quite possible they may keep two restrictions on a chartered accountant in practice. Number one, they will debar him from doing a test function as well as articleship training. But whether to keep this restriction on that particular chartered accountant or not is discriminatory on the part of ICAI. If I give you an example, suppose you are becoming a full-time professor of any morning college and you are also CA in practice. You went to ask ICAI, can I take this professorship or not in a morning college? It is quite possible that institute will allow you to accept that professorship of a morning college on a full-time basis without keeping any restriction on you, because you can give justice to your practice after 12 o'clock. But suppose you are already a CA in practice and you want to become a professor in any noon college, and where you are approaching ICAI for taking a prior approval, institute may keep these two restrictions on you, that number one, don't do a test function, and number two, you can't train the articles. Subject to these two restrictions, you can accept that particular job or professorship. So this two restriction, whether to keep on you or not, is discriminatory on the part of ICAI. So in total, if we see clause 11 is talking about that being CA in practice, you can't engage in any other business or profession. But apart from business or profession, you can become a director, provided yourself or your partner is not the auditor of the same concern. Apart from business or profession, what else I can do? For that purpose, Regulation 190A is created. And Regulation 190A is being bifurcated in two parts. Number one, things what we can do freely, and things what we can do subject to prior approval. And as and when we are going to take a prior approval, they are keeping two restrictions on our part. Number one, a test function, and number two, articleship training. Whether to keep this restriction or not, that is discriminatory on the part of ICAI, on the part of council. If we see the practicals related with this clause 11, there are so many practicals related with this clause 11, and it is frequently being asked in ICAI's examination. Practical number 1. Mr. J started his practice as a chartered accountant in 1996. During 1999, he got an offer for the post of chief accountant of a software development company as a full-time employee for a salary of 60,000 per month. On accepting this offer, Mr. J converted his practice into a partnership firm by taking a fresh chartered accountant as his partner. Mr. J neither intimated the institute nor obtained permission from the institute about his employment. Will Mr. J be held guilty under the CA Act or not? In this particular case, I want to convey there are 2 points. Number one, he accepted a job, and he accepted a job in a company. When he is accepting a job in a company, he should take a prior approval under Regulation 190 capital A. As he has not taken a prior approval, he is subject to Regulation 190 capital A and clause 11. So it would be treated as a clear violation of clause 11, part 1, first schedule of Chartered Accountant Act 1949. Second part of this question is related with, he converted his proprietorship into partnership and he didn't intimate ICAI. For that, clause 11 won't become applicable. Later on we will discuss one particular clause for it, but again I want to convey, for that clause 1 part 2 second schedule, it would fall in a second schedule. Clause 1 part 2 second schedule will become applicable. So there are 2 parts to this particular question. Number 1, he went for a job in a private company without taking a prior approval, and that's why clause 11 will become applicable. And he didn't intimate ICAI for converting its proprietorship into partnership. In that particular case, clause 1 part 2 second schedule, which we will discuss later, will become applicable. So it's a clear violation of Regulation 190 capital A and clause 11 in this particular case. If we move to the second question, a chartered accountant in practice takes up the appointment as a managing director of a public limited company. Now we know managing director has 2 words, manager as well as director. When you are becoming a manager, you are becoming an employee. Number 1, you should take prior approval. Number 2, you are becoming a director. If you can remember, we learn a condition for becoming a director. Yes, you can become a director, provided yourself or your partner should not be the auditor of the same concern. So number one, you need to take a prior approval. Number two, yourself or your partner should not be the auditor of the same concern. And number three, situation which is written in the appendix that you should not having substantial interest in that company. So for becoming a managing director somewhere, there are three conditions. Number one, you need to take a prior approval. Number two, yourself or your partner should not be the auditor of the same concern. And number three, that you should not hold the substantial interest in that particular company. Subject to this, you can become a managing director somewhere. If all conditions are satisfied, there is no violation of clause 11, part 1 of first schedule. Moving to the next question. A chartered accountant holding certificate of practice and having 4 article clerks registered under him accept appointment as a full-time lecturer in a college, examine his conduct in the light of CA Act and the regulation thereunder. One thing I want to clarify, students, that as and when there would be a question in which it is being clearly mentioned that consider act and regulation, you need to believe in that answer there would be a regulation. Suppose the heading that answer as per Chartered Accountant Act and regulation. So in the answer you need to make sure that there would be some regulation, application of some regulation. In this particular question you can also find out that it is written that consider Chartered Accountant Act and the regulation. Here he accepted a position as a lecturer in the college, and where he was already a CA in practice. He was having 4 article clerk. Now he should take a prior approval of the council as per regulation 190 capital A, and he has not taken the prior approval of the council, and that's why it would be treated as a clear violation of clause 11 part 1 first schedule of Chartered Accountant Act 1949. Moving to the next question. A chartered accountant in practice entered into partnership with his uncle in a textile business which however did not take off. Will he be held guilty of professional misconduct? Here in PM they have applied 2 clauses. So I will explain you both the clauses. But according to me only one clause should become applicable. Number one, they engage in a business, so that's why clause 11 should become applicable. A CA in practice cannot engage in a business. And number 2, he engaged with uncle. He made a partnership with the uncle. Apparently it seems he is not a CA in practice or he is not other professional as well, and that's why clause 4 is also applied. So apparently it seems that it's a violation of clause 11 because engaging in a business, and clause 4 part 1 first schedule because he engaged with a person who is not a chartered accountant in practice or other professionals. So we can answer as per clause 4 and clause 11 both, and it would be treated as a violation of both according to the answer of PM. But if someone asked me, personally I would believe it would be simply treated as a violation of clause 11 only. As engaging in a business. Once you are engaging in a business, afterwards you can engage with anyone. It doesn't make any difference. If you are doing CA practice with some non-professional, then only clause 4 can become applicable. But if you are doing a business, that business itself is a crime for you, afterwards you can do with anyone else, whoever he may be, doesn't make any difference. And that's why though the answer written in PM, violation of clause 4 and clause 11, obviously will write answer accordingly in the examination, because obviously ICAI will refer the PM as and when they are checking your papers. But if someone asks me, my personal belief, it would be simply treated as violation of clause 11 only, just for engaging in a business. Clause 4 can become applicable. Clause 4 part 1 first schedule can become applicable if you are a CA in practice and if you are doing your practice with the person who is not being permitted. But for doing business, there cannot be any such restriction, and that's why there should be application only of clause 11. But anyway, we need to follow clause 11, clause 4, both are being violated in the current case, and it would be treated as violation of both these clauses of part 1 of first schedule, Chartered Accountant Act 1949. Moving to the next question. Mr. Clever, a practicing chartered accountant, accept appointment as a full-time lecturer in a college affiliated to the Bombay University. Again, this question is similar. that you are accepting as a professorship job in a college somewhere, and where you have not taken a prior approval of the council, you need to take a prior approval of the council as per regulation 190 capital A, and that's why it would be treated as violation of regulation 190 capital A as well as clause 11 part 1 first schedule of Chartered Accountant Act 1949. Moving to the next question. Amul is in a full-time employment of a limited company. A trading firm requests him to conduct tax audit under section 44 AB of the Income Tax Act 1961. He is a chartered accountant. He is in doubt whether to accept the offer or reject it. In this particular question, we need to take one assumption. In fact, it is not written in the question whether Amul is having COP or not. So we are taking the assumption he is having COP. Otherwise, our question will not move further. If he is not having COP, there is no further question of accepting any tax audit. So we are assuming that he is having COP. Plus he is also in a job. So when he is having a COP and he is being in a job somewhere on a full-time basis, he must have taken a prior approval of the council. And as and when you are going to take a prior approval of council, they are keeping two restrictions on you. Number one, a test function you can't do, and number two, you can't train the articles. So in a current case, you can't do the attest function. So you can't accept the tax audit assignment which is being offered to you. So we are taking assumption in this particular question that he must be having COP. And plus he is going for a job, and there are two restrictions, and accordingly he cannot accept this particular assignment. Moreover, moving to the next question. Miss Charming, a practicing chartered accountant who, having been resigned from a college where she was a part-time lecturer in the accountancy, coaches every day morning for 2 hours students preparing for the university examination. If you can remember the first list under regulation 190 capital A, things what we can do freely, permission granted generally, for which we are not required to take a prior approval of the council. In that case, if you can remember, private tutorship is absolutely permitted. You can call the students at your place, you can teach them, even if you are a CA in practice and you are not supposed to take a prior approval. If you are doing this job without taking prior approval, still it won't be treated as violation of regulation 190 capital A as well as clause 11 part 1 first schedule of Chartered Accountant Act 1949. Moving to the next question. Ram, a chartered accountant in practice, entered into a partnership with Shyam, who is not a chartered accountant, for the purpose of carrying on business. Explain whether Ram is guilty of professional misconduct under clause 4 and 11 of first schedule of the Chartered Accountant Act 1949. Basically, this question is similar to the question what we discussed earlier. In this particular question, they have mentioned both the clauses. This question is again there in PM, and in PM it is written that there is a violation of clause 4 and 11 both. Why 11? Because he engaged into a business, and why 4? Because he engaged with a non-professional. And that's why it would be treated as violation of both clause 11, clause 4 of part 1 of first schedule of Chartered Accountant Act 1949. But as I said earlier, I want to repeat it again. According to me, it's simply a violation of clause 11 just for engaging in a business. Once you engage in a business, it's a violation of 11. Afterwards, you can engage with anyone. It doesn't make any difference. Clause 4 part 1 first schedule should become applicable only in a situation when you are doing your CA practice with a non-professional and not otherwise. Moving to the next question. Mr. Empel, a practicing chartered accountant, has accepted a joint authorship of a book, Management Accounting, along with his colleague who is a cost accountant in the college where he is a part-time lecturer. If you can remember, a list of permission granted generally under regulation 190 capital A where we are not taking any prior approval. Authorship of book and article can be done freely without taking any prior approval if you are a CA in practice. And once it can be done freely with whoever you want to do. Not necessarily you should be a chartered accountant. Not necessarily you should be a cost accountant. He may be an arts graduate. He may be a person of literature. You can write a book with him and nothing wrong. There is no restriction. But I want to give you a reminder of clause 7 part 1 first schedule, which was keeping certain restriction. You cannot disclose the professional achievement. You cannot use any designation other than chartered accountant. I want to give you a reminder of clause 6 as well. Clause 6, advertisement, personal communication, appearing for interview and circulars prohibited for us. Under clause 6, it was being written that as and when you are writing a book, you can mention ACA, FCA, your name. You can disclose yourself as a chartered accountant, but there should not be any firm name. If there is a firm name, clause 6 part 1 first schedule will become applicable. In a current question, Writing a book under clause 11 is absolutely permitted without taking prior approval. There is no restriction as such, and it won't be treated as a violation of clause 11. Moving to the next question. Mr. JJ, a practicing chartered accountant, engaged himself as a part-time finance manager of Quick Return Securities Limited. He is of the view that as both the functions are independent, he need not take permission from the institute. In a current case, a chartered accountant in practice can do job at two different places. If he is doing a job under any CA in practice, he is not supposed to take a prior approval. But suppose if he is doing a job in a company, in any other firm which is not a CA firm, or in a trust, if he is doing a job over there, he will have to take a prior approval of the council, and that's why in a current case, as he has taken appointment in a company, he will have to take a prior approval as per regulation 190 capital A. And if it is not being taken, it would be treated as violation of that regulation, as well as clause 11 part 1 first schedule of Chartered Accountant Act 1949. Moving to the next question. Mr. DD, a practicing chartered accountant, took over as the executive chairman of a software company on 1st April 2010. On 10th April, he applied to the council for the permission. Whenever you are taking a job or whenever you are accepting any appointment in a company, you should take a prior approval, whereas in the current case it is a subsequent approval and not the prior approval. He accepted the position on 1st April and he applied to council on 10th April. Accordingly, it's not a prior approval, it's a subsequent approval, and that's why it would be treated as violation of regulation 190 capital A and clause 11 part 1 first schedule Chartered Accountant Act 1949. Moving to the next question. CADD, who is a leading income tax practitioner and consultant in Mumbai, is also trading in derivative. This question is being recently asked for 2-3 times in ICAI's examination. Now it is not being clarified in the question that whether he is a CA in practice or not. We need to assume that he is a CA in practice and is dealing into derivatives. Now, if you can remember the list of things what we can do subject to prior approval of the council, within that list a last point was any other business or profession in which you are engaging. Dealing in derivative was not there within the actual list, but the last point was indicating if you are engaging in any other business or profession, you will have to take a prior approval, which prior approval is not being taken in a current case, and that's why it would be treated as violation of clause 11 part 1 first schedule along with regulation 190 capital A of the Chartered Accountant Regulations 1988. So in total it would be treated as violation of regulation 190A as well as clause 11 part 1 first schedule of Chartered Accountant Act 1949. Now the next question is saying a chartered accountant having COP entered into partnership with persons who are not the members of institute for the purpose of carrying on business. The share of the chartered accountant in the profit and loss was 25%. He was to take part in the business and was entitled to represent the firm before government authorities. He was operating the bank account of the firm. He was receiving money from the customer and was also looking after the affairs of the partnership. It's a clear violation of clause 11. You are engaging yourself in a business. And clause 11 itself is saying, being a CA in practice, you can't engage in a business. Plus clause 4 part 1 first schedule is saying you can't be a partner with a person other than a chartered accountant or permitted professionals, which is also being violated in a current case. So in a current case, it would be treated as a violation of clause 4 and clause 11. But there is a question, should I mention regulation 190 capital A in this particular answer? No. Regulation 190 capital A you should mention as and when there is a question related with either of the list, things which are being permitted freely for us or things which are being permitted subject to prior approval. We know that business is absolutely denied for us, and that's why we are not supposed to refer regulation 190 capital A. Regulation 190 capital A we will refer only in a case if it is not a matter of business or profession. And that's why in a current case, engaging in a business would be treated with a violation of clause 11 as well as clause 4 of part 1 of first schedule of Chartered Accountant Act 1949. At the same time, next question, CAPB is a practicing since 2008 in the field of company auditing. Due to his good practical knowledge, he was offered editorship of a company audit journal which he accepted. However, he did not take any permission from the council regarding such editorship. If you can remember regulation 190 capital A, there are two lists things what is being granted generally. Within that list it was being permitted that if you are becoming editor of a professional journal, you are not supposed to take a prior approval. But in a second list, which was subject to prior approval of the council, other than professional journal, then you need to take a prior approval of the council. If you are becoming an editor of a professional journal, company audit journal, it's a professional journal, and that's why you are not supposed to take a prior approval of the council, and accordingly it won't be treated as violation of regulation 190 capital A as well as clause 11 part 1 of first schedule of Chartered Accountant Act 1949. So accordingly there is no violation in the current case. Next question. PB, a chartered accountant in practice, is the statutory auditor of UB Limited for the year ended 31st March 2015. In January 15, he was being appointed as a director in FB Limited, which is the holding company of UB Limited. A good question. Basically, we learn a CA in practice can become a director provided he himself or his partner is not the auditor of the same concern. So I can become a director somewhere in a company A Limited, provided myself or my partner is not the auditor of A Limited. Now, in fact, I am not the auditor of A Limited, but I am the auditor of B Limited, which is a subsidiary of A Limited. So, what position I am having? I am auditor of a subsidiary company and I am a director of the holding company. This position is again denied under clause 11. Because if you are a director of a holding company, you are as good as director of the subsidiary company. And accordingly, in a same company, you cannot become auditor and you cannot become a director. Otherwise, it would be treated as violation of clause 11, part 1, first schedule, Chartered Accountant Act 1949. So in a current case, it would be clearly treated as violation of clause 11, part 1, first schedule, Chartered Accountant Act 1949 if he is accepting directorship of holding company when he is auditor of a subsidiary company. The next clause, clause 12, which is a last clause for a part 1 of first schedule. Clause 12 is saying who can sign the auditor's report. Auditor's report can be signed in case of a proprietorship concern by proprietor, in case of a partnership concern by any partner. But it cannot be signed by an employee even if he is also CA in practice. Suppose in my firm there is an employee who is also a CA in practice. Can he sign the audit report on behalf of my firm? Not at all. It can be signed by a proprietor, it can be signed by a partner, but it cannot be signed by an employee even if he is also CA in practice. Now this clause 12 is matching with one of the section of Companies Act, and that is section 145 of the Companies Act 2013. Section 145 of Companies Act is also saying the same things. That who can sign the company audit report, proprietor or any partner, and not by an employee even if he is also CA in practice. How it differs from clause 12. Section 145 is saying who can sign the company audit report, whereas clause 12 is saying who can sign the all types of audit report. Those same things are written at both the places. Clause 12 is saying who can sign all types of audit report, because clause 12 is not applicable to company auditor, it is being applicable to any CA in practice. So be it be a tax auditor, internal auditor, statutory auditor, any audit position, as and when it is being signed, it should be signed by a proprietor or any partner and not by an employee even if he is also CA in practice. In a current topic I want to convey further, section 145, as and when we are reading of Companies Act, we are always reading along with section 141 bracket 2. Section 141 bracket 2 of Companies Act is saying that only CA partner can act and sign. So there are two things under Companies Act. Section 145 and Section 141 bracket 2. Section 145 is saying audit report can be signed by a proprietor or any partner and not by an employee, even if he is also CA in practice. And Section 141 bracket 2 is saying if he is a partner, he must be a CA partner. Right now we are learning about clause 12, and clause 12 is simply saying proprietor, any partner, not by an employee, even if he is also CA in practice. But during the course of audit, many a times our paid staff, our articles are signing various places that this work is done. They are representing cases against different authorities. They are making different statements. Can it be prepared? Can this kind of documents or vouchers can be certified? Or can they represent the cases in the income tax or anywhere else? For that purpose, one thing you need to keep in mind, they can do the things till the time it is not resulting into any expression or certification. If I give you an example, that suppose a chartered accountant was getting a work of issuing a stock statement to the banking authorities, where he will have to certify the quantity and the amount of the stock. It should be certified only by a chartered accountant and not by his staff, because this is resulting into any certification or any expression. So the staff can do the work what is not resulting into any expression or any certification. Till that time, clause 12 will not become applicable. Otherwise, clause 12 will become applicable. Now if we see the questions related with clause 12. A firm of auditors of a limited company gives power of attorney to an employee chartered accountant to sign report and the financial statement of the company. This question is not there in PM, a good question. The concept of power of attorney cannot be there in a business. It cannot be there in a profession. It can be there only in a business. The concept of power of attorney cannot be there in a profession. It can be there only in a business. You remember, in a business, when someone is going outside, they can give a right of signing to someone else by assigning them power of attorney. But this is not possible in case of a profession. You need to keep in mind, if a CA in practice going somewhere, he cannot assign further rights of signing to anyone else, to his staff members. It is also applicable to the medical profession. It is also applicable to the other professions. So professionals cannot give power of attorney. And accordingly, in a current case, if power of attorney is given and if signing is done by someone else other than CA in practice, other than proprietor or other than partner, he will be subject to clause 12, part 1, first schedule of Chartered Accountant Act 1949. Moving to the second question. Ram and Company is a firm of chartered accountant, in practice of which Ram and Shyam are partners. The firm was appointed as auditor of a limited company. After the completion of the audit, but before the submission of the audit report on the company accounts for the year ended 31st March 1989, both Ram and Shyam went on a pilgrimage to Badrinath. In their absence, under their instruction, the audit report was prepared and signed by Hari, a chartered accountant employed by the firm. Now there are two things in this question. There is a firm where there are two partners, Ram and Shyam. After completion of work of audit, they went on a pilgrimage and they give right to their employee, who was also a chartered accountant, Mr. Hari, to sign the audit report. In this particular case, Hari is not subject to any clause, but Ram and Shyam will be subject to clause 12, part 1, first schedule, Chartered Accountant Act 1949. Who can sign the auditor's report? The proprietor or any partner. It cannot be signed by an employee even if he is also CA in practice. So in a current case, it would be treated as a clear violation of clause 12, part 1, first schedule of Chartered Accountant Act 1949. Moving to the next question. Mr. A is a practicing chartered accountant working as a proprietor of Messrs. A and Company. He went abroad for 3 months. He delegated the authority to Mr. Y, a chartered accountant, his employee, for taking care of routine matters of his office. During his absence, Mr. Y has conducted the under-mentioned job in the name of Messrs. A and Company. He issued the audit queries to client which were raised during the course of audit. He issued production certificate to a client under Central Excise Act 1944. And he attended the income tax proceedings for a client as authorized representative before income tax authority. Please comment on the eligibility of Mr. Y for conducting such job in the name of Messrs. A and Company and liability of Mr. A under the Chartered Accountant Act 1949. Here, the chartered accountant in practice, the proprietor went abroad and for within these 3 months, he allocated 3 jobs to his article clerk or to his paid staff, which is being done by them. Now, I made it very clear what job can be done by the paid staff, by the articles, the work which is not resulting into any expression or any certification. Now, 3 jobs being conducted here. Number 1, raising the audit queries. Raising the audit queries is not resulting into any expression or certification, and that's why it can be very well done by the articles or the paid staff. Nothing is wrong, no violation of clause 12. Second, he issued production certificate. Certification cannot be done. Attestation cannot be done, neither by paid staff, nor by the article, nor by any employee, even if he is also CA in practice, cannot be done on behalf of our firm. And as it is done, it would be treated as a violation of clause 12 part 1 first schedule. And the third thing, representing against income tax authorities. Representing against income tax authority is again not resulting into any certification or expression, and accordingly it won't be treated as violation of clause 12 part 1 first schedule of Chartered Accountant Act 1949. So in total 3 jobs being carried. Number 1, audit queries raised. It's okay, fine, it can be raised. Nothing wrong. Second, production certificate issued. That is wrong. And number 3, representing case against the income tax authority. That is also not wrong, because it is not resulting into any expression or certification. So in total, clause 12 is talking about who can sign the auditor's report. If it's a proprietorship concern, the proprietor. Partnership concern, any partner. It cannot be signed by an employee, even if he is also CA in practice. But what job can be done by the employee? What job can be done by a paid staff? The job that can be done by employee or paid staff which is not resulting into any expression or any certification. Before we move to the next part of the first schedule, I want to give you a complete revision of part 1 first schedule. We know that we are in a first schedule, part 1, which is applicable to CA in practice. There are 12 clauses. Remember, clauses we are writing in numerics, part 1, 2, 3, 4 in Roman number, and first schedule, second schedule we are writing in words. Clause 1 was talking about a CA in practice cannot allow anyone else to use his firm name except his partner or employee, provided employee is also CA in practice. Clause 2, a CA in practice cannot share his fees with others, but he can share with 5. Number 1, a partner, a retired partner, legal representative of the deceased partner, any other professionals permitted within regulation 53A, and any other CA in practice. Clause 3, he cannot share the fees of others, but definitely he can share the fees of those who are sharing their fees under clause 2 with a CA. Clause 4, with whom he can make partnership in India and abroad. In India, he can make partnership with 2, a CA in practice and other professionals permitted within regulation 53B. And in abroad, he can make partnership with 3. Whoever is being permitted within section 1415, whoever is being permitted by central government, and whoever is being permitted by the council of the ICI. Clause 5, he cannot generate work through wrong means and wrong person. Clause 6, advertisement, personal communication, appearing for interview and circulars are prohibited. But yes, he can respond to the tender and he can ask any other chartered accountant to give work on professional basis. Clause 7, there are 2 restrictions. He cannot use any designation other than chartered accountant unless it be a degree given by an university established by law in India or any approved institution. And second, he cannot disclose professional achievement. Clause 8, you need to make communication with previous auditor in writing. Clause 9, you cannot accept company audit assignment unless and until the formalities under section 139, 140, 141 and 142 is complied with. Clause 10, you cannot charge fees contingent upon future funding, but exceptional cases are given within regulation 192. Clause 11, being CA in practice, you cannot engage in any other business or profession, but nothing shall disentitle a chartered accountant from becoming a director, provided he himself or his partner is not the auditor of the same concern. Apart from business or profession, what he can do is covered within regulation 190 capital A. And clause 12 is asking who can sign the auditor's report. proprietor or any partner. It cannot be signed by an employee even if he is also C in practice. Out of 12 clauses, there are 2 clauses, clause 1 and clause 5, for which no question is given, neither in my book, nor in PM, nor in RTP, nor in any module part. Plus, you need to remember, as and when you are writing the answer, it should be in 2 parts. First part is the clause itself, which you need to learn by heart and you need to write as it is. And in the second part, you need to correlate that particular clause with the question itself. So, this is the ending of part 1 of first schedule of Chartered Accountant Act 1942. Now we are moving for the second part of Chartered Accountant Act 1942 for the first schedule.
If you like this video, share it with your friends. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to watch more such videos and learn from our expert faculty members. Press the bell icon to get regular notifications whenever we upload a new video. Download NDI mobile app to get complete CA course online. We value your support. Thank you for watching.